Welcome to Famous Frequencies, where untold truths come alive, and silence is never the end of the story. Today, what began as a quiet disagreement in chambers spiraled into a clash so public, so explosive, that even the marble walls of power couldn't contain it. It started with a vote, not a dramatic one, not even a vote that most Americans paid attention to, a subcommittee ruling tied to a federal ethics measure. But Jasmine Crockett, sharp, unbending, and always prepared, stood her ground. Her interpretation of the clause conflicted with a recent decision that Justice Elena Kagan had strongly supported, that tension should have ended in disagreement and procedural notes. But it didn't. What happened instead shocked even those hardened by years in Washington's trenches. Days after that vote, Jasmine received a letter, a formal complaint. At first glance, it seemed routine, but the accusations weren't. Obstruction of justice, disrespect to judicial authority, abuse of congressional privilege, words that don't get thrown around lightly. And it was signed by the chambers of Justice Elena Kagan herself. To most, it looked like a misunderstanding, something a few phone calls and clarifications could fix. But Jasmine knew better. This wasn't a mistake, it was a message, one that read loud and clear: stay in your lane. The media barely noticed, but within legal circles, the tremors were real. A sitting Supreme Court justice moving to censure, and possibly gavel, a sitting Congresswoman. That's not political drama, that's constitutional crisis territory. Jasmine didn't flinch. She showed up to the preliminary hearing not with a swarm of attorneys, but with a single folder in hand. No entourage, no media circus, just calm eyes and that quiet steel she's known for. The courtroom was thick with tension. Judge Kagan sat behind the bench, not in her Supreme Court robe, but presiding as a federal judge temporarily appointed to this administrative proceeding. An unusual, nearly unheard of step, and everyone knew it. The clerk read out the charges. Silence fell. All eyes turned to Jasmine. "Do you have counsel present?" the clerk asked. She smiled gently. "I speak for myself." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Representing yourself in front of a justice of the Supreme Court wasn't brave. It was insane. But Jasmine knew what she was doing. The hearing began. Elena Kagan's tone was cool, collected, almost clinical. She questioned Jasmine about the language used during that now infamous vote, tried to pin motive, tried to twist neutrality into defiance. But every time she prodded, Jasmine pushed back, not with aggression, but with precision. "Justice," Jasmine said at one point, voice steady, "you are interpreting my duty to uphold truth as a threat to your authority. That's not the Constitution's fault. That's your ego's." Kagan's gavel slammed down. "You will not question this bench." "I'm not questioning the bench," Jasmine replied. "I'm defending the right to stand beside it." The room fell still. And then came the moment no one expected. Jasmine reached into her folder and pulled out a sealed affidavit, not from a lawyer, not from a staffer, but from a retired federal judge who had overseen similar ethics cases and had documented clear procedural overreach in Kagan's actions. It wasn't just a defense, it was an accusation in return. As the affidavit was read aloud, murmurs rose. Kagan's face didn't move, but her fingers tightened around her notes. By noon, everything had changed. What was supposed to be a hearing to silence Jasmine Crockett had become a trial of judicial conduct. And now, the question hanging in the air wasn't whether Jasmine had defied the court, but whether Kagan had crossed a line that no justice ever should. And then the door opened. A tall, composed man entered, eyes locked on Jasmine. Her husband, not just a figure of emotional support. He was a renowned constitutional attorney with a record of dismantling overreaching institutions with nothing but facts and fire. He walked straight to the front row, placed a single binder on the desk beside Jasmine, and said nothing. But the binder spoke for him. Inside were 300 pages of precedent, decisions, and constitutional opinions, all aimed at one thing: proving that what Justice Kagan had done was not just personal, but unlawful. Jasmine didn't need to open it. She already knew what was inside. Months ago, during a late-night discussion over takeout and court rulings, they'd talked about the nightmare scenario: what if judicial power was ever used like a weapon? They never thought they'd be living that hypothetical. But here they were. Judge Kagan flipped through her papers, visibly trying to maintain her composure. The courtroom, once under her control, now felt unstable, unpredictable, like a wave was rising that she hadn't anticipated. "I will remind you, Mrs. Crockett," Kagan said sternly, "this is not a political theater. This is a courtroom." "No, Justice," Jasmine replied evenly. "This is a courtroom being used as political theater, and I will not let it silence elected representation." Every sentence landed like a punch, every word felt like a rope pulling the rug out from under the bench itself. Jasmine stepped forward. "Would the court like to enter this binder into evidence?" Kagan hesitated. Everyone saw it, her delay, her discomfort, her doubt. She finally nodded, submitted. The clerk retrieved the binder, placing it before the court reporter. Jasmine walked back, her eyes never leaving the justices, and Kagan knew in that moment this wasn't a hearing anymore, it was a reckoning. For hours, the binder unraveled the fragile justification behind the complaint. Case after case exposed how similar disagreements between legislative and judicial branches had never escalated to courtroom threats because of one sacred principle, separation of powers. And what Jasmine's husband included as the very end sealed the room in silence. A memo never released publicly from a former Supreme Court law clerk, written under anonymity, warning of internal discussions where some justices feared being challenged too forcefully by rising lawmakers, especially black women like Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't just revealing, it was damning. By now, the gallery was packed. Journalists had caught wind of the confrontation and flooded in. Social media was exploding. #Crockett vs. Kagan trended worldwide. And then came the final blow. Jasmine asked the court for permission to make a closing statement, not as a defendant, but as a citizen. Kagan tried to object, but the murmuring around her bench told her she'd lost that power. Jasmine stepped forward. "I didn't come here today to defend my voice," she began. "I came to defend everyone's right to speak truth to power even when power wears a robe." She turned slightly to the gallery. "They called this disrespect. They said I crossed the line. But the only line I've ever crossed is the one that divides silence from courage." She paused, looked back to Kagan. "You can't jail dissent, you can't imprison integrity, and you will never silence a voice that echoes the Constitution." The room erupted. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a moment. Justice Kagan, stoic as she tried to appear, knew this was the end of the line, not just of this hearing, but of her image as untouchable. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "This court of broken bar finds insufficient grounds a broken bar to continue this complaint." Her voice cracked. She dismissed the session. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply walked out, husband at her side, her silence louder than any headline. But the story didn't end there. Over the next 24 hours, major news outlets picked it up. Cable panels debated every second. Law professors broke down the arguments frame by frame. And the Judiciary Committee opened an investigation not into Jasmine, but into the weaponization of power from within the court itself. Public opinion flipped. What started as an accusation turned into an anthem. And Jasmine, she became more than a representative. She became a symbol. Within weeks, legislation was introduced to establish clearer boundaries between judicial oversight and legislative accountability. They named it the Crockett Amendment, and though it faced opposition, it passed the House with a thunderous majority. Justice Kagan, she remained on the bench, but her name, once synonymous with restraint and brilliance, now carried the shadow of a day when she overreached and got called out for it. As for Jasmine, she never once mentioned that day again in public. She let the silence speak, let the laws passed afterward tell the story. Because she didn't need to shout to be heard. She had already proven that even the loudest gavel can't drown out truth when it's spoken with purpose. And she made them all remember, in the face of injustice, sometimes the most powerful weapon is a woman who refuses to back down.